Hi, I'm Jason Leggett. I'm your professor for the fall 2020 in this course, PL 66, which is Constitutional Law. Most of you will be taking this class as Justice Academy students and/or criminal justice majors, and most of those students will be transferring to John Jay College. One thing that's a little bit different about PL 66 and PL 67 is that they're law classes. So you can think of these as legal studies, you can think of these as law and society, and in some ways they're very similar to political science classes at other institutions. I just wanted to establish the difference then between criminal justice and law. Law is kind of a larger category. So if you think of courts, cops, and corrections, each of those groups serve both social functions, say keeping the public safe, their brothers, fathers, mothers, sisters, etc. And they also have legal functions, duties that they've been assigned through legislation, through the Constitution, or through a state constitution. But then there's also extra legal duties, what you're mostly seeing in the debates about what would be the appropriate funding of the police, what are the appropriate responses, what can be done about racism within policing institutions. These are all happening outside of formal legal arenas like lawsuits or legislation. And so law is a much larger category and can be broken down into a lot of different parts. And then in this class specifically, we're looking at the relationship between law as a general institution and the United States Constitution, and with some history with the state constitutions, and also the idea of a constitution going back to England and then with the colonies. So it's a big, broad class, but it's, historically, but it focuses mostly on issues within law, and particularly injustice issues. Ordinarily, in class, we'd spend a few weeks talking and meeting with each other. In this case, I suppose I'll tell you a few things about me, but you can always ask me more. I have a law degree from Seattle University. I've been teaching at Kingsborough for over 10 years now. And my specialty, or my area of interest as a legal scholar, is in something called rights consciousness and legal mobilization. I'm particularly interested in groups that begin some kind of process to try to get justice. They often talk about feeling powerless as they start to form groups and exercise their rights. And they have various interpretation on what rights and law mean. And they kind of enter this conversation through power and powerlessness. And so folks who study this, like myself, come from a wide variety of fields: anthropology, sociology, law. Some of them are activist lawyers, others are legal scholars. And then there's also the PhD candidates that come from sociology, again, anthropology, cultural studies, feminism, critical race studies, lots of different kind of folks who look at these issues. So I'll bring a variety of ways of looking at these problems, in other words. I also use a teaching strategy called culture responsive teaching, and I've written numerous publications that have been published in peer-reviewed journals on this topic. So you could read those if you want. You can also go to YouTube and just type in culture responsive teaching, and you'll get a wide variety of opinions and ideas about that. The common core is that we're considering the idea of what would it be like to learn from multiple points of view, specifically cultural, and I take a particular reference from students over the last 2 years to bring in scholars from critical race theory, feminism, and folks who are looking at labor issues or economic or monetary issues, so poverty, etc. So you'll see a lot of different ideas being presented in this class. and hopefully that will be interesting to you. So it's a little bit more comprehensive, more complicated, and it's much more in the style of a law class or an advanced kind of class than what might be, looking at a textbook and going through a table of contents. I've taken a lot of time to create structured learning opportunities to help you actually understand the material and not just mindlessly repeat it, which I know can be a challenge, but at the same time I feel like it's a better value for your money, and since this job is taxpayer funded, I feel a certain obligation to provide a better and more thorough understanding of what law is, especially when it comes to democracy and political participation. So the website is, I'm using something that CUNY provides both to students and to faculty. And I'll say right off the bat, you could just take a picture of this, but I think what would be best, especially if you're using your phone to access the materials, to use a browser that has a bookmark and to save this. Another thing you could do is just open one of your note applications and just type in this website once, and then you can always just go to it and open it up. You can search it on Google, and as far as I know, it shows up. I've done it from different accounts and different computers, and it seems to work most times. If you have trouble, of course, email me, and I'll also be posting the link, which will just have a click here function in Blackboard, and it should also go to whatever email that you've established through CUNY first. Now, the website is also a syllabus, although I'd call it an interactive syllabus because you can click on it, and I'll change it based on feedback from you and how we're kind of progressing. The main thing is you'll see where it says click here, right? Those are the places I obviously want you to click. If you've already clicked it or you've already ordered the book, for instance, in this slide, you clearly don't need to click it. But of course you can if you want to. And then it's a scroll down web page. So for those of you who like using the menus, and especially the drop down menu, obviously you can. But I will do my best to make sure that you can get every part of the website through this one page, to try to just limit the number of clicks, and then also just to keep content in one kind of central location. And then you'll see my email here. I'd prefer you email to Gmail simply because I get it more often. The Kingsborough email has a spam filter, and sadly, a lot of times that results in your email going into the trash and gets deleted without me ever seeing it. So especially if it's urgent, I prefer you email me at the Gmail. You can email me at the Kingsborough and take your chances. I mean, it works, a fair amount of the time. So it's just, if you don't get a reply from me, I guess email me again at that address, but then eventually maybe try Gmail. And then I have a personal website that's similar to this website, if you want to know more about me or the projects I'm working on, or some of my other interests. Learning outcomes are pretty clear, I think. I've worked hard to make sure that these align with both what you need to be able to do at Kingsborough and what you need to do after Kingsborough. So you need to become familiar with cases as law, right? That's probably the core of constitutional law, so no matter who you take, you'll likely be looking at least one or two cases. I think if you're looking at 15 cases, that's probably too many. But nonetheless, one major idea is case law that comes from what's called the common law, and we'll go into that in more detail in both your research and when I provide video lectures. Probably the most misunderstood part of constitutional law, and I suppose why there are so few constitutional legal scholars, is something called judicial interpretation. And the Greek form of that, the historical side of it, the ancient history side of that, is called exegesis. And it's the idea that a document can be multiplied in the way that people interpret it. So not just multiple interpretations, because judges still have to follow a set of what are called canons. And there's also pressure, being a judge, of being liked by your peers and respected. They all go to law school. They're all been lawyers. In most cases, they are legal scholars of some sort. And so there doesn't tend to be too many different interpretations. I mean, I think 3 to 4 to 5, could be a lot on any given issue. You're usually familiar with 2, the majority and the minority opinion. But there's a little bit more to it, and especially with the relationship with politics and how judges are part of the political process historically in the United States, which is very different. I study comparative law, and it's very different than in so-called civil code countries like Italy, Russia, most of the former Soviet Union states that have not switched over to a common law situation. And so those codes are really built on more of the Justinian Code, the Napoleonic Code, and a much different system than the common law system. So that's always a challenge. So I'll try to be as clear about that as possible to help students do well in that section. And then I need you to really start to think about yourself and how do you fit within this constitutional democracy. Something that is both part of the civic engagement requirement, but it's also, if you really want to understand law and politics in the United States, you can't see it as a spectator or at a distance. Even if you don't think you have documentation, citizenship, or that you're discriminated against, all 3 of those human beings, regardless of how they've been labeled or how you've been labeled, do have rights, in fact. Whether they're international human rights or they're just more substantive rights, that has historically always been the case. Now, procedural rights is where most of the politics seem to be occurring these days. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but I won't go too much detail. What's more important is that you start to understand that there's a relationship in identity agency and advocacy, and that democratic practice is really the combination of those 3 things. And to understand that identity is a changing thing based on what you see in yourself, what others see in you, and how that changes over time and in different contexts. And then knowing how to use that to further either your interests, defend yourself, or collectively organize with other people. So this semester has been, all summer, I've been looking back at what we did in the spring in that transition period. But I've taught online for over 7 years, and I also took online classes when I was a student. So I'm familiar with the online environment. That said, most of you probably would have signed up for an in-person class if we had it. And, God willing, in the spring we'll be back in person. I suppose vaccine willing. But the idea here is I've done what I can to try to make it more straightforward for folks who are uncomfortable in an online environment. And I want to make sure that you're able to complete the work and not be worried about deadlines. So I've given a big chunk of time to complete work, so you can, within reason, complete work at your own time. You won't get something like, this response is due at 6 p.m. on a Thursday. I won't do that. I'll give you more of like, you have 4 weeks to complete this work kind of thing. I also always accept student work, again, within reason. So if you've missed a deadline, I'd prefer you do the work and send it to me than to not do it. And then we're not going to go in order of the Law and Identity Reader, the textbook that we're using, which is an anthology that I've put together with a co-author that combines social science readings, humanities readings, and legal cases to kind of give you a better framework of how these things work together, that they're not isolated. And I'm going to give you a lot more choice about which of those readings you do. Obviously, you'll still need to do readings, but you won't have to do all of them. Granted, if you wanted to read all of them, that'd be great. And I'm certain that would help you in your understanding of the material. And that brings me to a point. This is a difficult text because this is a difficult class. At a lot of institutions, this would be taught at the junior level, the 3rd year of school. I took it in my 2nd year. I think it's possible to take it at that time. But I do think this is a little bit different than some of the other classes, say like English 12 or English 24. So if you are having difficulties with the readings, the best thing to do is set up a Zoom with me and we'll talk about them. I find that to be the most useful since we don't have the privilege of being together and talking about these readings together. So grading, I have to say off the bat, although I do see on Rate My Professors that I've got some folks who've explained it quite clearly. I don't think the class is particularly difficult to complete. I think the materials are difficult. I think thinking about law is not simple. It's not biology, so it's not like memorizing a few words and then putting them together. Not to say biology is easier, but it's just a different type of class. It requires you to think from multiple points of view. But more, the reason why this is not a multiple choice kind of class is this is a class that actually, very much matters to your participation in democratic politics. So it is one of those core classes in civic engagement that if you went to any institution that was talking about civic learning and democratic engagement, this one comes up, probably along with American government and sociology. So I think, just understanding that I actually have a preference that you understand these, because I think we'd all be better residents of the United States of America and could build a better social world, if you want to think about it that way. And again, most students express that they like this approach, which is why I do it, right? If most students said they hated it, then I do something else. And I've worked hard. A lot of the content that comes from the Law and Identity Reader actually comes from students, including all of the cartoons, with the exception of the first one, which is a revision, right, a remix. The student took a cartoon and then changed it up a little bit. But several of the quotes are from students, and then what went into that book was also from students. So, we thought a lot about how students go through this kind of content. And so I feel comfortable now that this is a good format. The only thing I can, sometimes students have a hard day, a bad week, or, sadly, I think they have a bad experience in another class, and then, you take it out on me. Last semester I gave a lot of free, what's the word I'm looking for, flexibility. And it was just too stressful for me and probably harmful for my mental health. And I'm sure that, the 3 or 4 students that were incredibly disrespectful are probably like that all the time, right? And so I just think for my own benefit and to be able to help more students, I can't help one student 10 times a day, especially who's yelling at me. So I just want to make this clear again. I'm not talking to 97% of you. I'm talking about 3% of you. If you feel the need to be rude, do it somewhere else. We can disagree, but be civil about it, and understand that I get paid to do this work. I am an expert, right? I'm recognized as an expert. I'm published on this work. I work hard, and I care about it. So I think that I'm going to try to work something out with you, and it would be better if we're all civil about it. This semester, I'm going to make the decision that if things are out of line early, there are people on our campus who intervene and who do this work, and they get paid to do that work. So I think I'm going to take advantage of that this semester, and let the social and mental health workers do the work that they're paid to do, because it's a little bit too much stress for me. And this is already a difficult environment to work in. Obviously, everybody understands that with COVID. But also just dealing with students who don't necessarily want to take online classes. I'm sympathetic, and I want to provide as much resource as I can to help your well-being, which might include needing other people who are more qualified than I am to deal with underlying issues. That said, I am probably going to work with you on most issues, and I don't mean, I'm going to be careful about how I say this, but after living 12 years in New York, I don't mean, if you're aggressive and you say, this is what I need, that's not what I mean. That's fine, right? I think you can imagine where the line is of being civil and incivil. And then that brings me to grading, right? Grading is going to be based on multiple things. So I want to try, grading is going to be based on multiple things. Again, this is not a multiple choice kind of class. I'm not going to reward you for your ability to read and plagiarize information back on a multiple choice test. I think there's a huge problem with that as a way of teaching, and I'm not 100% sure why folks who do that get paid. But more importantly, some of you are going to do really well right at the beginning, and then others of you are going to do much better towards the end. So I want to see kind of how you progress, right? So I'm not really grading you against each other, which a multiple choice exam does. I'm grading your progress, right? Because you all understand this concept differently and you have different lived experiences. So, your very first responses are going to set like a baseline, and you're going to get credit for that in the sense of attendance, right? So that's the only attendance requirement I have, is these 2 diagnostics at the beginning. Then you're going to have about 4 weeks to do your own research, and I have 4 research options for you that I'll go over in a second. And so you're going to spend about 4 weeks, 3.5 weeks, reading, watching videos, and then doing any independent research that you want to further understand your injustice category. And then I have very specific questions that I've put on the website that tells you what you need to answer, and that'll be a Google form. You'll answer those in short answer, try to get to the point kind of thing, and then I'll give you feedback on that. However, you will be getting feedback based on not a grade. You're going to get, if you do the work, you're going to get a 10, right? So you're going to get feedback on just more like clarification, like, do I understand you correctly, that this is your idea of rights, etc., something like that. And really I'm looking for how did you engage with the material, because it's going to matter much later when you have, like, let's call it more serious work. In other words, more serious assessments, right? The work is going to be the same, because you're going to be looking at constitutional law and how to kind of resolve through the law these different conflicts of injustice. So you're going to build up, in other words, so that in the next set, you'll then have assignments and applying those course materials to your outside research, and this will come out on the midterm exam, which I don't want to be too big of points, so I just put it at 20 points to say this is like a good checkpoint, right? To that point, you'd have about 30 points, and we'd see, like, so if you have 10 out of 30, that's not good, right? That means you didn't finish the midterm. If you had 12 out of, you didn't do very well on the midterm. But if you had 20 to 30 points, then you're progressing, right? You're getting there. And then the big assignment will be the judicial opinion writing assignment, as you see, for 30 points. And that's where you're really going to be thinking. I'm going to see, how are you making sense and applying this information, and what is your interpretation kind of becoming? And then after that, you're going to have assignments that are going to lead into the final exam. And so 10 to 40 points will determine not on whether you complete the assignments, but what is the quality of the work that you turn in. I'll use a rubric to show you what you need to do well, and then you'll kind of see how you can improve. I'll also be giving you feedback from your midterm to give you prep for the final exam. And then the final exam is obviously going to be much heavier, because I want to see whether you're applying all this information in one kind of sensible way, and then I'll have a little reflection that will not hurt your grade, but it can certainly boost it. Now, for extra credit work, I'm going to give you a lot of options here, but you need to email me ahead of time so that we can agree. One thing I don't want to get into is you see extra credit as a replacement, so you can't do extra credit unless you've done the work up to that point. Now, for the total points possible, it's 150 to get an A+. And I'll have to see how students are doing. I'll probably grade down on a curve, meaning that whatever the distribution is of students. So if there's a 150 and then the next person has a 125, then the 125 would be the A. Now, there aren't any prerequisites formally that you have to take, but I think that there's 2 classes that if you have taken them or have some experience with, it'll be easier to get through the readings, and you'll have kind of the base knowledge. If you haven't taken American Government and Intro to Sociology, I will provide some resources that help lay a groundwork, right, so that you can not catch up per se, but have like the basics. And I'll do that over time. And that'll be a mixture of my own materials and materials I find on the internet and get from other professors. But I think there's three major categories that I'm going to focus on through the semester that kind of refer back to these prerequisites, these suggested prerequisites. So understanding that we're in this modernist period, and at some point, you might consider about postmodernism, but understanding that these constitutional issues, these legal issues, are following something called the Enlightenment and really the medieval age of feudalism. And so I want to make sure that you kind of understand the significance of that, less about the details or memorizing certain dates, right? But more about like, why does that matter? What was it that the framers in the colonies were trying to do that was different, so that we might judge how successful they've been? And then there's sociological investigations. In other words, since the 30s or so, there's been a lot of progress on how we think and analyze social settings and social situations. And so it's good to think about these kind of ideas and apply them into our investigations as to how justice is being served, whom is justice serving, and how do we account for all of these injustices. And so we want to think about it in that sense, and that's where I'll spend a fair amount of time. And then legal change is something we want to get to towards the end. And if you happen to be taking my 66 at the same time as 67, we look at courts and judges as legal change agents. And so, it would be a nice segue into that course, or if you're transferring to John Jay or to another institution, this is where you'd be looking at the more political side, the power resistance. And clearly with the Black Lives Matters movement, you could see, and the general resistance to Trump and the people for Trump, you can see how this would be a part of the political landscape or the debate. And so what I want to get students to do is at the very basics, just get to this idea of a third way, right? It's not Republican or Democrat. It's not conservative or liberal. There's always more than two options to any situation. It's like going to the pizza place and saying, well, I can only have two choices, so either give me the one with cheese or the one without cheese. You see how silly that is, right? When you look at the pizza place, at most places there's 6, 7, 8, 9, who knows how many options. So I want you to think about that, right? When professors or teachers or whoever, right, media people are reducing everything to two sides, that's a choice they're making. It's not reality. And so you want to think about why they're making that choice and whether they hold power. And so it's a way of thinking about law as a more political instrument, and that's where I'm trying to get you to go. Now, the anatomy of the course is pretty straightforward, so I'll move through this pretty quickly. I just want to make sure that you see this now so that you'll understand when you look at the website. It's basically organized into 3 parts, and you'll have grading after each part, which I will post those grades on Blackboard due to student demand over the last 2 semesters. So the first thing you have to do, though, is diagnostics. There's 2 of them, and this is to get information about you so I understand kind of your point of view. In class, we do this through dialogue, right, and through small group work. I don't really have that luxury, so this is the best I can do replacement-wise. So do try to give me some thoughtful answers, right? They're not graded. I'm giving you attendance verification, so this is like your attendance grade. So you just have to complete them in order to move on in the class. And that's just needs to be done by September 17th. So you have, about a week, a little less than a week. I'd like you to get, them going quickly. And then you've got weeks 1 through 4, right? So from September 12th to October 10th, after you do those first 2 diagnostics, it's going to be like free work in a way. So I have 4 categories you see here: race, gender, ethnic, and poverty. And these are injustices that occur that people label this way. And so I might share a presentation with you later that kind of explains how I came to this process. But these are persistent categories of injustice. And so you're going to pick one of these groups that is interesting to you, that you find relevant. Are you interested in injustices that have to do with race, gender, ethnicity, poverty. And in the gender category, it isn't just sexism, right? There's lots of different ways. So you might think about the first category, it's about white supremacy. The second one is about male dominance, hetero male dominance. The third category is really about kind of cultural dominance and how it's linked to citizenship. And then the fourth is how do elites in particular use their knowledge and their power against people who are poor. Now, once you've picked one of these reading groups, you're going to click on the link to get resources on the website, and they'll be just like I showed you in that table. You make your way through those. So some of you might do that all in one weekend. Some of you might do a little bit of a time, but you basically work your way through those resources, and then I believe you'll be prepared to take that first assessment and answer those questions well by applying your knowledge. You are, of course, encouraged to do your own research, to come up with your own ideas, and you can email me. We can set up a Zoom and talk about the readings to see, how do you feel before you take that assessment on October 1st, and then I will try to organize some group Zooms, right? So you can join in and talk to each other. But I'll know more about that when I get some time and space to think about it. Now, that first assessment, like I said, will be these 7 questions on a Google form. So again, this will be on October 1st, and I'll give you a grade on October 15th, although you will get 10 points if you complete it within reason, right? So meaning, did you answer the questions? Are they somewhat sensible? This is, again, I'm not trying to punish you here. I'm just trying to see, are you understanding the basics of this material, and are you going to be able to complete the class well? Now, part 2 is going to be a bit of a shift. So there's going to be now these required readings from the reader, and these are looking more at the structure or the organization of law. And I'm going to teach you about judicial interpretation within that structure. And then we'll have these class discussions about these readings that I'll break up at different times and different days so that you have the opportunity. If you can't do it, you can make up one of these Zooms by writing a reflection about these readings, which 1 to 2 pages max, and for all of them, right? So not one each, but just what are your general takeaways after you did your readings. Then you'll go into the midterm examination, and that's when you're going to want to apply these readings. So as you see, right, all the readings will be repeated on the midterm, so the better you understand those, obviously the better you're going to do on your midterm. Then we're going to switch it up for the second half, and you're going to start really thinking about what is your judicial interpretation, and you're going to write something that's called a judicial opinion, which is the decision-making process of judges. And so I will provide a video lecture that gives you that big overview, and then also will include the instructions for that assignment. I'll probably also have a little Zooms, a little Google form to make sure that you understood that. And then this will be due, I'll give you the exact due date, but I think it's November 14th. And so you'll have a little bit of time. I'm not looking for you to write like a 10-page paper here. This is going to be like, show me that you understand what we're learning about interpretation and how it applies. And then I'll have a series of extra credit assignments that you could build after you do your judicial opinion, but you'll need to email me and let me know if you're interested in doing that. And then you're going to be able to show me that you understand. So there's the assessment process there as well. And then the last part is going to be about how you can apply this information, probably using current events, although I'm sure the Black Lives Matter movement will still be moving forward, but we'll also be hitting this time the election cycle. So it'll be an interesting time to see how this information will apply to quote-unquote the real world. And I will have, again, a mixture of lectures, extra credit assignments, and then an activity, and then a short assignment where you can actually get up to 30 points, depending on the quality of your work. And then I will give you one kind of lecture that gives you a larger overview that kind of shows us like what have we learned so far. And then finally, again, there'll be a framework for you to kind of think about your final exam, and this is where I'll be kind of narrowing you in to see like, okay, did you get the main points? You'll have a reflection, and then you'll have your final exam. So I think that part's probably the clearest, right? And that will be just the last few weeks. So just to review, there's 3 parts, 3 sections of the semester. Each part will be completed over time. So meaning that you can't do everything all at once, you have to wait for each of those kind of time periods. So what I think for those of you who like to plan, what I suggest and what some students have had success in the past is if you get my work done, right, or our work done quickly, that gives you time to focus on your other classes that might have more rigid timelines and due dates. So I do kind of see this as a class where you could do a lot of work over like 2 days and then take a few days off kind of thing. But you, of course, could do a little bit of work every day, and either approach I think would be fine. I do encourage you to talk to one another, especially after we get the Zooms going with the groups. You don't have to, but we will be able to work together, and I find that to be much more effective. Students and I learn more from other students. The main thing is just to apply the course readings, right? That's true of most classes, I think, but in my class it's particularly important to show me that you understand this material, because this is the only way I can judge you and grade you, because I can't see you in the classroom. Do your research, right? I strongly encourage you to do your own research. Like, come up with all sorts of ideas. I'm not going to discourage you from coming up with your own interpretation and linking that up to certain judges. So if you find yourself, wow, I really agree with Justice Ginsburg, or I really agree with the late Justice Scalia, great. Just show me how and what that means. So feel free. You could also say, I agree with folks that think the Constitution is all crazy. Great, right? Just make sure that you're giving me your interpretation based on what you're reading, right? And it's not just merely your opinion. I value your opinion, but this is a class where you're going to show me that you're learning from the materials. I'm likely going to, I'm almost definitely going to have weekly Zoom Q&As, so you just call in and ask a question, almost like those old-time radio shows. And I'll give you different times and days to do that, but I'm really thinking Sundays around 1 p.m. Eastern. I'm probably going to hold those open because that's a convenient time for me, and I want to make sure that at least that's happening. So you could think about that as office hours. But I won't be providing any lectures unless students ask for particular things, right? Then I'll start talking about that. You're free to ask a question and stay on. You're also free to ask a question and then leave. I'm not really taking attendance. It's just I want to give you the opportunity to talk with me. And I really actually enjoy the time talking with you. And it makes it feel a little bit more like we're in real school, right? So I think I've revealed that I'm okay doing online education, but I prefer in the classroom. And then I'm available to Zoom most times. So as long as we can agree to a time. So it is helpful if you say, like, especially those of you who are working. I used to work part-time and actually full-time when I was in school as well, so I understand. So if you say I only have time at 3 p.m. on Saturday, I will try to make that available. So I think that's about it. And again, if you have any questions, you can email me or feel free to ask me in some of the early Zooms. So good luck. I hope you have some fun. And again, fear not. I will be here to guide you through this process.